do this, and I'd like to particularly thank Ms. Leslie Kaiser, who has been so instrumental in getting us together. She's the Dean of Faculty at Gonzaga. So I'm going to begin, as we begin everything at DeMatha, in prayer, and I'm only going to ask that we change one thing at the end. At the end of prayers at DeMatha, the person who's leading it says St. John DeMatha, and the assembled group says, pray for us. Today I'm going to say St. Aloysius Gonzaga and St. John DeMatha, and then we'll say pray for us at the end of the prayer. Okay? All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for allowing us to be here together. You tell us that wherever two or more are gathered in your name, you are present. Help us in all of our interactions with all of the people that we come in contact with to be in the right relationship with them, to render you incarnate. And especially let us think of this during this Advent and Christmas season. We ask all things through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. St. Aloysius Gonzaga and St. John DeMatha. Pray for us. Thank you very much. Okay. I have a couple of housekeeping matters before I introduce Dr. Sachs. One is that Gonzaga, like DeMatha, is an all-boys school, so figuring out where the women's rooms are is always the first order. So the ladies' rooms here in this building are behind you, to my right, up one flight, and it's well lit and well marked. That's right back there. So, and there's men's room on this floor, almost right below that. So that's one part. Secondly, this is DeMatha and Gonzaga doing this. Dr. Sachs is not hawking his works, and we're not either. But we have copies. If anybody at the end would like copies, we have them back there. Mrs. Curley has them, and it's $15, which is what it cost us for the book. So it's a straight pass-through if you want it, if you would like to get a book. When we get to the question and answer, Dr. Sachs is going to talk for about an hour. You can line up at the two microphones on the side, and he'll take questions. At 8 o'clock, I know anybody who wants to go, of course, you're more than free to go at any point. But he also said he will stay here and answer questions until whenever there are no more questions. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Sachs. Leonard Sachs earned his bachelor's degree in biology from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Mass. He graduated Phi Beta Kappa in 5 semesters, and he was 19 years old. He went on to the University of Pennsylvania. He earned his PhD in psychology and then his medical doctorate. He did a 3-year residency in family practice at Lancaster General Hospital in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. In 1990, Dr. Sachs established a family practice in western Montgomery County, Maryland. He provided care to children and adults in suburban Maryland for more than 18 years. In 2008, he began a 5-year sabbatical and led workshops across North America and around the world. In the past 12 years, he has visited more than 380 schools and led workshops not only all across the United States, but in Australia, Canada, England, Germany, Italy, Mexico, New Zealand, Scotland, Spain, and Switzerland. Dr. Sachs returned to full-time clinical practice in January of 2014 near his new home in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Dr. Sachs has been married to his wife Katie for 24 years. They have one daughter, Sarah. She attends Agnes Irwin, an all-girls school in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. He's written 3 best-selling books, Why Gender Matters, Boys Adrift, and Girls on the Edge, and he has another book in progress, and he has a book in French that's also out. So, without further ado, Dr. Sachs, welcome.
Well, I certainly want to thank Dr. McMahon for that introduction, for inviting me to meet with you, and for a wonderful supper at a charming restaurant, which is also a bookstore. And as I was saying to him, Montgomery County has the cachet and the inflated house prices, but they really have nothing over PG County. Thank you. So, anyhow, I don't know if he mentioned, he did mention that my first job was at Louis, and I went to Greenbelt. But anyhow, so I want to start with a question, and we're going to answer this question later. Later on in the talk, I'm going to mention longitudinal cohort studies. These are studies where researchers enrolled a large number of kids. For example, one study, 17,000 babies born in the same year, and then followed these kids throughout infancy, into elementary school, going into the school, interviewing the teacher and the other students and the parents and the child, through middle school, assessing this kid carefully at 12 years of age, measuring IQ, measuring physical fitness, asking the teachers, does this kid have self-control? How friendly is he? How open is he to new ideas? And doing this with quantitative measures, lots of time involved in this enormous investment of manpower. And on into high school, and after high school, and throughout young adulthood, 24, 28, 32, 35, 38 years of age. These kind of studies allow us to ask, what parameter measured at 12 years of age predicts whether this 12-year-old will 20, 25 years down the road, when they're in their mid-30s, will they be healthy? Will they have a good income? Will they be happy? Will they have life satisfaction? One of these 5 parameters predicts all 3 of those good outcomes. Only one. The other 4 do not. I want you to be thinking about this, because well, actually, let's go ahead and ask you right now. Who thinks its physical fitness, measured at age 12, predicts both good health and wealth and happiness at 32 years of age? Who thinks it's IQ? Who thinks it's self-control? Who thinks it's openness to new ideas? Who thinks it's friendliness and agreeableness? Okay. I'm going to keep you in suspense. Later on in the talk, I will give you the answer, and we'll talk more about those longitudinal cohort studies. But first, I want to talk about the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This is a program established by the United States Congress back in 1969. Administered nationwide in public schools and private schools, chosen randomly with the various statistical caution to ensure that you're getting a good cross-section nationwide. Not traceable though to individual schools or districts, and for that reason, not a high-stakes test. Nobody at Gonzaga or DeMatha is going to get in trouble because Catholic schools nationwide didn't do well on the reading or writing exam. So nobody teaches to this test. And for just this reason, it's very useful as a measure of what kids in this country actually know and can do academically. Our own United States Department of Education regards this test as our nation's report card. It is the only test that is administered in all 50 states. Maryland has their assessment, Texas has their assessment, but there's no way looking at the state test. If you just look at the state test, that you can compare kids in Maryland to kids in Texas because the tests are different. This is the same test. It is designed as a constant yardstick administered in all 50 states and in Washington, D.C. It is administered grades 4, 8, and 12. Let's look at the data from grade 12. And you can break down the results by whether kids are eligible for free school lunches or not, whether they're girls or boys, whether they're white, black, or Hispanic, and then cross-tabulate. Let's do that. Let's look at white girls, grade 12, not eligible for free school lunches, and compare them to white girls, grade 12, who are eligible for free school lunches. That's a difference of 15 points. That's a big difference. That's about 1.5 grade levels. Now, why would it be the case that American girls from low-income homes are eligible for free school lunches? Why would it be the case that those girls do significantly less well on a writing exam compared to girls who come from more affluent homes? When I first started doing this talk about 10 years ago, I would ask people to raise their hand and volunteer to answer. And people would say, okay, kids from low-income homes, less likely to have 2 parents at home. Another person would say, kids from low-income homes, less likely to have parents who went to university. Kids from low-income homes, less likely to have books and magazines around the house. All of those are true, on average. And all of them might reasonably mediate this effect. Why girls from low-income homes do less well, on average, compared to girls from more affluent homes. Now let's look at white girls not eligible for free school lunches and compare them to their brothers. white boys not eligible for preschool lunches. It's precisely the same gap. And again, when I started doing these talks 10 years ago, I would ask, would anyone care to venture a guess as to why that is so? Why is this gap between girls and boys from the same demographic, the same household income, exactly the same size as the gap between affluent and low income when you look among girls? And people would raise their hand and say, well, girls are innately better at verbal skills, right? Psst, wrong. I'd say people used to think that 30 years ago, but then Dr. Janet Shipley Hyde in Wisconsin showed in the 1990s that's totally wrong, and nobody's believed it for 20 years. And it seemed rather ungentlemanly on my part. I mean, here the person would be kind enough to raise her hand, and people would write on their evaluation forms, Dr. Sachs was kind of mean, making fun of that person. So I don't ask anyone. Because the fact is, you don't know. You may be very well educated, you may have a PhD in this or that, you may have a PhD in education, and you don't know. You're guessing, and your guesses are not correct. There's no innate difference in the ability of girls and boys to write. Why is that so? Why is the gender gap in academic achievement on this parameter so large? And I have done this presentation all across suburban Maryland, in many, many different schools, and across the district. I've spoken on this topic in Anacostia, in Northeast, in Northwest. And in every venue, I've had parents come up to me and say things like, you know, my daughter's working hard, and she really cares about getting good grades, and she wants to get an A and not a B. And my son is a goofball who's more interested in getting the next level in Call of Duty than he is in getting an A instead of B in Spanish. Same household, same parents. The daughter's working hard, and the boy is not. Why? In the African American community, same story. African American girls not eligible for preschool lunches. American girls who are eligible, 16 points. Remember, it was 15 points in the white community. African American girls not eligible for preschool lunches, compared to their brothers, African American males not eligible for preschool lunches, 14 points. Remember, it was 15 points in the white community. No statistically significant difference in those gap sizes, 13, 14, 15, 16 points. Same is true in the Latino community. The gender gap on this parameter is very close to the gap separating low-income girls from more affluent girls. The same size gap separates more affluent girls from more affluent boys, and the same is true in the same size gap separates less affluent, that is, girls eligible for preschool lunches from boys eligible for preschool lunches. Why? Why do we see such a large and growing gender gap on many academic parameters? In the United States today, being a boy is a handicap in the classroom comparable to coming from a household in poverty. This is true for white, black, and Latino. It is much less true for Asian, which tells you right off the bat there's nothing hardwired about this, because ethnicity is socially constructed. Why is this so? I've prepared a handout for this talk with all these numbers. The point of the handout is to save you the trouble of taking notes and to facilitate your research. If you want to read more about this, there's a link in the handout to the NAEP website. You can pull up the numbers yourself from the primary source. The handout is online. It is my name, leonardsachs.com/dematha.pdf. It is case sensitive. It is all lowercase. And you must include the www in the .pdf. I'm going to rattle off more numbers and more studies this evening. And if you're curious to read the primary sources, you will find those references in the handout. The handout, as I said, is intended to save you the trouble of taking notes. It's not a supplement. It's not a substitute for the presentation. The handout is intended if a week from now you say, you know, I think there was something useful in that talk, but I can't remember what it was. The handout will jog your memory. That's what it's for. So I'm not the first person to point this out. In fact, all of the major news magazines in the United States have had cover stories on this topic. Time and Newsweek coverage was anecdotal and not helpful. Business Week had 10 pages of charts and graphs and numbers, very quantitative, and I thought it was very useful. Business Week had charts and graphs and numbers showing that you look at who's earning the top grades, who's participating in academic clubs, who's the valedictorian, who's editing the school yearbook or the school newspaper. And you find out all these parameters, there's a large and growing gender gap, with the boys falling farther and farther behind the girls. And as one of their experts said, it's not so much that the boys are falling behind girls that bothers me, it's that boys today are doing less well than boys were doing a generation before. And that statement really resonated with my own firsthand experience. I attended public schools in northern Ohio, suburbs of Cleveland. I was editor-in-chief of our high school newspaper. The editor-in-chief before me, Andy Borowitz, who now writes a column for the New Yorker, a comedy column, was the editor-in-chief before me. The editor-in-chief before him was a boy. I don't recall a girl being editor-in-chief before any of us. Today, my high school newspaper has 3 co-editors-in-chief, all girls. Last year, there were 2 co-editors-in-chief, both girls. The only boy whose name is on the masthead is the sports editor. All the other editors are girls. I was on the debate team. Most of the kids on the debate team in my day were boys. My high school still has a debate team. They're all girls. When did boys decide that arguing is not something boys do? When did that become uncool for boys? So this is the opening 2-page spread of that Business Week magazine article. The top panel shows the stars of this particular high school: the president of the student council government, the valedictorian, the editor of the school newspaper, the editor of the yearbook. All girls. The bottom panel shows the kids in remedial reading. All boys. Now that's a bit of an exaggeration when you look nationwide in the United States. When you look nationwide in the United States, you do find some boys who are high achievers. But at co-ed schools, you'll find that those high-achieving boys, the boys who are working hard to win the spelling bee, for example, are disproportionately likely to be East Asian or South Asian. They are Indian, Chinese, Pakistani, Bengali, Korean. For white, black, and Latino boys, working hard to win the spelling bee, working hard to get an A instead of a B in Spanish is regarded as unmasculine, uncool. It's not that effort is uncool. That wouldn't be true. So if a boy said to the other boy, hey, how about you come over and watch the football game Sunday afternoon? If he said, no, I gotta meet with the coach, we're gonna be working on some stuff for the big meet, that's okay. But if the boy were to say, no, I want to prepare for the spelling bee Monday morning, that would be like so faggy, it would be like totally unacceptable. Working hard to achieve an academic goal is now uncool. And this has consequences. Last year, who earned a 4-year college degree in the United States? 57% were female, 43% were male. But who graduated with highest academic honors? There the women outnumbered the men 3-1. Women are now overrepresented among those graduating with highest academic honors at university. And that's a huge change compared with 40 years ago. 40 years ago, the majority of college students were men, but men were overrepresented among those graduating with honors. 40 years ago, women were more likely to drop out of college than men were, very often because they were getting married and starting a family. Today, men in the United States are more likely than women are to drop out of college, and it's not because they're staying home to raise baby. It's often because they're going back to their parents' home to play video games in the basement. Of 100 young men who now enroll at American college, fewer than half will ever earn any degree. 40 years ago, the United States led the world in the proportion of young people who had earned college degrees. We're now number 15 on that list. Today, the United States leads the world on only one academic parameter, and that is the production of college dropouts. We generate more kids who enroll but do not earn any degree than any other developed nation, and that's by a pretty wide margin. A growing proportion of American boys regard academic achievement as something girls care about. And this is seen to a considerable degree in some other countries, but not everywhere. So I'm looking around this room, and I see a few very, very young people. By very young, I mean under 30 years of age. And when you give this talk to very young people under 30, they're like, okay, right, you know, girls care about getting A's instead of B's, and guys are goofballs and rather play video games. Okay, so like, what's new? Haven't guys always been like that? And what you have to explain to that very young person, you have to say, no, actually, guys have not always been like that. You have to explain to them, you say, in ancient times, before you were born, there was a group called the Beach Boys, shown here. And 50 years ago, they had a #1 hit song, Be True to Your School, just like you would to your girl. And Brian Wilson sings, if you're going to be a cool guy, you're going to be proud to wear a sweater with the name of your school on it. You're going to be true to your school, just like you would to your girl. He's not joking. He's absolutely serious. Who is that man? What is his name? Sam Cooke. Very good. 50 years ago, that man, Sam Cooke, had a #1 hit song in the United States. He's saying, don't know much about history. He's saying, now, I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be. Because maybe by being an A student, maybe I could win your love for me. He goes on to mention French, geometry, and trigonometry as subjects in which he's going to work harder to earn an A instead of a B, because he believes that by earning an A instead of a B, he will raise his status in the eyes of the pretty girl. That was American culture 50 years ago. Not today. Today, American culture is 50 Cent, it's Eminem, it's Simon Cowell who says school's a stupid waste of time because he didn't go to school and he's a bazillionaire, so anyone who goes to university is dumb. It's Akon, who chose the name Akon, A-K-O-N, to remind you of his claim. He claims to be a convicted felon. He claims to be a con. He claims to have been convicted of grand theft auto. He claims to have served 2 years in the Georgia State Penitentiary, a claim which turns out to be false. When he got to be famous, the reporters looked it up. They found that, well, he was arrested on a charge of possession of one-handed stolen property, but the charges were quickly dismissed. He's never been convicted of anything. He's never been inside a penitentiary except to perform. We've gone from a culture in which boys, both black and white, there is no racial difference on this parameter between black and white. There's a big difference between black and white on one side and Asian on the other side. But there's no difference on this parameter between black and white. On this parameter, we've gone from a culture in which boys wanted you to believe that they were scholars, working hard to get an A instead of a B in French, geometry, and trigonometry, to a culture in which boys want you to think they're convicted felons or gang members, even if they're not. And I have been at affluent private schools in Potomac, where the 8-year-old boys are making gang signs because they think it's cool to pretend that they're MS-13 or Crips. That's American culture today. White, black, and Latino males in the United States today are much less likely than their sisters to be editing the school newspaper, much less likely to care about earning straight A's, or winning the spelling bee, or graduating Phi Beta Kappa. Why? It wasn't true 40 or 50 years ago. It is true today. It's a huge switch in a very short period of time. Why did it happen? That's the question I try to answer in my book, Boys Adrift. The 5 factors driving the growing epidemic of unmotivated boys and underachieving young men. The 5 factors are changes in education, video games, stimulant medications like Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta, metadata, focal and adrenaline bands, which we now know damage the motivational center of the brain, endocrine disruptors like bisphenol A and diethylhexylphthalate, and the revenge of the forsaken gods. Tomorrow morning, I'll have the privilege of leading a workshop where teachers hear about how education has changed over the past 40 years. With the unintended consequence that many boys now regard education and school as girls' territory. Because boys doing things that boys have always done, like throwing snowballs at each other on the playground, pointing fingers at each other saying bang bang you're dead, or drawing a picture of a weapon in art class now gets you in trouble. We're not going to talk about that this evening. This is not a presentation for teachers. And there's not much you can do to change what's going on in the classroom. This is a presentation for parents. So we're going to focus on what you can do. And that means we have to talk about video games. And I need to be very clear because, again, looking around this room, I see some very old people. Right? By very old, I mean over 40. When you speak to people over 40 about video games, they're confused. How could video games be so important in the lives of boys? They don't get it. And the reason I discovered is because when people over 40 are thinking about video games, they're thinking about Pong and Pac-Man. And they're like, how could that be an important factor in anybody's life? Well, these are not those games. And the first thing I tell those old people is, look, if you haven't seen a modern video game like Call of Duty, like Grand Theft Auto, played by a skilled player, you need to watch. Because you don't understand the appeal of these games. They're huge. They're immensely well executed. Remember, the last installment of Grand Theft Auto 5 brought in more than $1 billion, $1,000 million. These franchises have enormous budgets to execute very compelling games. So, Craig Anderson and Doug Gentile have done more work than any other researchers anywhere to study what are kids doing with video games and what are the consequences. And one of the most robust findings, again, which is true whether you're talking white, black, or Latino, is that girls and boys tend to play different games and they play them differently. So a few years back, Farmville was a very popular game for girls. It was on the iPhone. It's kind of faded away. The most popular game for American girls and women right now is Candy Crush. Candy Crush is a free game. You can put it on your phone at no charge. And you can get through the first 30 levels or so without paying any money. But after the first 30 levels, if you want to get on the next level, it's going to be very difficult. Unless you press a little button to pay 99 cents for your little magic thing that'll get you to the next level. 99 cents. Candy Crush last year earned $1.5 billion in the United States because millions of American girls and women are paying 99 cents every other day. That works out to more than $4 million a day every day last year. That's the kind of money that game earns. Girls greatly outnumber boys among kids playing Candy Crush, as researchers find. The most popular video games for American boys are number 1, Grand Theft Auto, number 2, Call of Duty, number 3, World of Warcraft, number 4, Halo. These are all first-person shooter games. Anderson and Gentile find that the average American girl playing Farmville or Candy Crush tends to spend about 20 minutes or less in a session. The average American boy playing Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto spends about 2.5 hours per session. And I often meet with the high school kids to talk about this. And I was at a boys' high school in the United States, and I was sharing with them some of this research that I will share with you in a moment about the effects of playing Call of Duty as a video game. And one of the boys raised his hand very politely, and I called on him. He said, "Excuse me." He said, "Call of Duty is not a game." He said, "It is a lifestyle." And the boys applauded vigorously and stamped their feet on the wooden floor. I haven't found a girl who said the same thing about Candy Crush. Although I did recently see a girl who was wearing Candy Crush leggings. Anderson and Ginelli find that the average American boy now spends 13 hours a week playing video games. I'm not talking about surfing the web, that's separate. I'm talking about playing a dedicated video game like Halo, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, compared to about 4 hours a week for the average American girl who's playing a different game, something like Candy Crush, or like that, 4 hours a week. So, what are the effects of playing video games on academic achievement? Well, Anderson and Ginelli find that below a threshold of about 6 hours a week, there are no effects. A kid who spends 5 hours a week playing video games does no better and no worse in school compared to a kid who doesn't play video games at all. Beyond that threshold of 6 hours a week, there is a roughly linear and negative correlation, which is a fancy way of saying the kid who spends 10 hours a week playing video games does less well in school than the kid who spends 5 hours a week playing video games. The kid who spends 20 hours a week playing video games does much less well in school on average than the kid who spends 10 hours a week playing video games. And Craig Anderson was very generous with his time with me when I was writing Boys Adrift. And I asked him, why is that? And he answered with one word: displacement. Displacement. What does Craig Anderson mean when he says displacement? What he means is that if you're spending 20 hours a week playing video games, that's 20 hours a week you're not doing something else, like studying or sleeping. And that correlation holds without regard to video game content. It doesn't matter whether you're playing Madden NFL, or Call of Duty, or Grand Theft Auto. So in your handout you'll find the Anderson and Gentili guidelines, which they wrote based on their research with thousands of kids over the past decade. No more than 40 minutes a night on school nights, and no more than an hour a day on weekends. And your minutes do not roll over. The analogy here is to alcohol. Appropriate alcohol drinking for an adult is 1 to 2 drinks in an evening. But if you go a month without having a drink, that doesn't mean you can have 10 drinks on a Saturday night. That's binge drinking, and it is unhealthy. Likewise, if this boy goes a month without playing video games at all, he's not allowed to spend 10 hours on Saturday playing video games. The analogy to alcohol continues. The guideline of 1 to 2 drinks a night is for most adults, but not for alcoholics. For an alcoholic, the rule is complete abstinence. Most boys who play video games are not addicted, but about 1 in 8 boys are. Among girls, it's hard even to come up with a good estimate. It's clearly fewer than 1 in 100 who are addicted. Now, I'm a medical doctor, I'm a PhD psychologist, and addiction is a major focus of my professional work. What does it mean to be addicted? The defining feature of addiction is loss of control. So if you're permitted to sit in on an AA meeting, as I was, which is a very rare privilege if you're not personally participating, and a man gets up and he says, hey, my name's Steve, it's 12 years, 3 months since my last drink, and I am an alcoholic. He doesn't say I used to be an alcoholic, even though it's more than 12 years since his last drink. He is an alcoholic, because he knows that if he has 2 drinks, he may lose control. That's what it means to be addicted, to be an alcoholic. And the same is true for some boys, a minority of boys who play video games. So this boy has a big test tomorrow, he plans to get to bed around 10:30. At 10 o'clock he figures he'll just go online and spend half an hour playing the game. At 3 in the morning, his mom comes in and says, you've got to get to bed, it's 3 in the morning, and he becomes violent when she tries to turn off the game. That's addiction. If your son is an addict, then the rule is complete abstinence. You have to destroy the device. If he's going to a friend's house, you have to call up and say, are there going to be video games there? Okay, I'm sorry, my son can't go. No devices in the bedroom. There can be no screens in the bedroom. This is no longer just my opinion. This is the official guideline of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the link to the full text of their recommendation, October 26, 2013, is in your handout. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screens in the bedroom, no TVs in the bedroom, no internet-enabled device in the bedroom. Sure, your kids need to be online to do a school assignment, but the computer has got to be in the kitchen or other high-traffic area. That's the AAP recommendation. It should not be in the bedroom with the door closed. Because if it's in the bedroom with the door closed, you have no idea what he's doing online. He could be surfing the web for pornography. You knock on the door to come in, and he switches the page. And a father said to me, he said, my son would never lie to me. And I said to him, well, your son is more likely to lie to you than to anyone else. And Dave is very clear on that point, because he cares what you think. Because he knows that you don't approve. Because he doesn't want to disappoint you. Your son is more likely to lie to you than to anyone else. You know, and I love the opportunity to speak in Catholic schools, because then we can mention the Lord's Prayer without getting sued. Jesus didn't say, make me strong to resist temptation. He said, don't lead us into temptation. Because he understood that if you lead us into temptation, we will fall. And that is absolutely true of a 15-year-old boy. If you lead him into temptation, he will fall. It's not reasonable to put that temptation before him. Don't lead him into that temptation. No devices in the bedroom. No unsupervised access to the internet. Again, that is now the official guideline of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and it's your job as a parent. So you recall the subtitle of my book, Boys Adrift, refers to the growing epidemic of unmotivated boys. There seem to be quite a few high schools in the United States that assign students in English to write a letter to a living author of a book that the student has read. And they get packs of these letters with the return address of an American high school. There doesn't seem to be any requirement that the letters be kind or courteous. And a number of boys have written to me. One boy said, your book's totally ridiculous. He said, we're incredibly motivated to get to the next level in Grand Theft Auto. We just don't care about Spanish. Why should we care about Spanish? And I think the boys have a point. You spend 20 hours a week playing these video games, and what matters changes. Getting an A instead of a B in Spanish isn't so important anymore. What's important is finishing all the missions in Call of Duty. Because, again, Anderson and Gentile found that boy who spends 20 hours a week playing Call of Duty is hanging out with other boys who spend 20 hours a week playing Call of Duty. Getting an A instead of a B in Spanish is not going to raise your status in that group. But being the first to finish all the missions will. The virtual world matters more than the real world. Video games are not all the same. Some are worse than others. In the United States, video games are rated E for everybody, T for teen, or M for mature. The most popular video games in the United States, which are Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, Halo, are all M-rated games. They're first-person shooters in which you're killing people and you're killing them in a very realistic and grotesque way. So Anderson and Gentile have done this extraordinary longitudinal research, meaning they've enrolled more than 3,000 kids when the kids were 12 years of age. And they followed them for 3, 4, 5 years. At 12 years of age, they interview them and do various psychological inventories to quantify, is this kid altruistic or selfish, honest or dishonest, patient or impatient, gentle or hostile? And then they come back year after year, and at age 15 do another comprehensive evaluation. And this is a large study, and it is a cohort study. So the way to think of this, conceptually, is imagine you have two boys living in adjacent homes right next to each other on the same block. Each home has the same household income, same family composition, same race and ethnicity, same language spoken at home. The only difference between the two homes is that in one home, the parents have said, you're not allowed to play any M-rated games. You can spend 20 hours a week playing video games, but no M-rated games. And then in the adjacent home, the parents have no idea what games their son is playing. That boy who is spending 20 hours a week playing the games that are rated E or T, games like Madden NFL football or NBA basketball, that boy's personality does not change. He's probably doing less well in school than he would be if he wasn't playing video games. But he doesn't become more selfish, less honest, more hostile, etc. There's no systematic change in personality among boys who spend any number of hours a week playing games rated E or T. But the boy is spending most of his time playing M-rated games, like Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, which are the most popular games in the United States. He changes. Over 3 years' time, not in a week or a month, but over 3 years' time, he becomes more selfish, less honest, less patient, more hostile. And the magnitude of that change is large. The magnitude of that change over 3 years' time is comparable to the difference on those parameters between a boy raised in a violent and abusive home compared to a boy raised in a loving home. And the fact that this boy happens to live in a loving home does not protect him. And Anderson and Gentile have cataloged more and more stories of boys who engage in violent assault. From good homes with loving parents, and they say, I just wanted to know what it felt like to pull the trigger for real. It's a large effect. And Anderson and Gentile find furthermore, the boys have no insight. When you ask a boy, do you think you've changed at all? Do you think you're any less patient or less kind than you were 3 years ago? These boys say no. We live our lives relative to our neighbors. It turns out these boys who are spending 20 hours a week playing Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto, the boys they hang out with are spending 20 hours a week playing Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto. And they're all shifting. But none of them are aware of the shift. Because they're like, I'm not any different compared to Jason or Damien. They don't realize how they're changing. Video games are not all the same. Some are worse than others, even among M-rated games. Anderson and Gentile have found the games that push this shift in personality fastest and farthest, from gentle to hostile, from honest to dishonest, from patient to impatient. The games that push this shift fastest and farthest are games which employ what Anderson and Gentile call a moral inversion. A moral inversion means that within the context of the game, good is bad and bad is good. So, Grand Theft Auto, the most popular video game in the United States. To complete your missions, you will need weapons and money. You get the best weapons by killing police officers. So in Grand Theft Auto, the best way to move ahead and get the best weapons is to sneak up on some police officers and kill them before they realize what you're doing. Now in real life, sneaking up on police officers and killing them just because they're police officers who've never done anything to you would be an evil thing to do. But in the context of the game, it's a smart and clever thing to do. That's what they mean by moral inversion. If you want to play this game, you must assume the role of a male avatar. You cannot play the game as a female. There are no female avatars in the game. There are females in the game. Most of them are prostitutes. And you can have sex with them, meaning you can watch your avatar flopping on top of her, but you will have to pay her money. So you go up to her and she'll tell you how much, you give her that money, then you can watch your avatar flop on top of her, but you need money in order to complete your missions. And school counselors across the United States, I was giving this talk to school counselors recently, and at this point in the program, one of them said, oh, because she's heard this so many times from her boys, if you're clever playing the game, after you have sex with her, you take your gun out and you shoot her in the head. And as the blood pours very convincingly out of her head and she moans and dies, you get your money back. You don't have to do this, but it's a smart thing to do in the context of the game. Now in real life, having sex with a prostitute and then killing her and taking her money back would be horrible and evil. But in the context of the game, it's a good and clever thing to do. That's a moral inversion. Good is bad, and bad is good. And that's the kind of game that pushes the shift in personality most rapidly, Anderson and Gentile find in their research. And this game, this particular game, Grand Theft Auto, is the most popular game in the United States. Legislators in Sacramento were alarmed when they read about this. And they asked Anderson and Gentile please to fly to Sacramento, which they did, and gave sworn testimony to the California State Assembly, and met with a number of the legislators one-on-one. And the legislators said, "Are you for real? Are you kidding me? Is this true? That playing these games changes boys in profound and fundamental and lasting ways." He said, we need to write a law. And they wrote a law, making it a civil offense to sell any of the most heinous games. And they appointed a commission to determine which are the worst games. Not just any violent games, but violent games in which you get rewarded for raping women, for killing police officers. Those games are going to go on a special list, and if a merchant knowingly sells the game to a minor child, the merchant will be liable for a fine. It's not a criminal penalty, it's a civil penalty. Basically, this law would move video games into the same category as cigarettes. They'd be sold behind the counter. Still be legal. Any adult could buy them for a child. That's not against the law. If you want your kids to play this game, you can still do it. But they said, in the discussion surrounding the law, the legislature said, we want to support parents who don't want their kids to buy these games. We want to give parents some support, because right now you can go to any store and buy any game. So the California State Assembly passed a law which was signed into law by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is kind of ironic. But Governor Schwarzenegger said, I may have played the video game character, but in real life, I absolutely share the concern of other parents that we don't want 9-year-olds playing these games. The video game industry promptly brought suit, claiming that the California statute violated their First Amendment rights of free speech. The video game industry lawsuit went to the United States Supreme Court. And in a decision written by Justice Antonin Scalia, the United States Supreme Court sided with the video game industry and threw out the California statute, rendering it null and void. In your handout, you will find a link both to Justice Scalia's opinion and to Justice Alito's concurrence. And Justice Alito's concurrence I found very poignant. Justice Alito said, look, I have read Anderson and Gentile's research, and I share their concern. I think they present very powerful evidence that these games change kids in a really bad way. I share that concern, he said, but it is the ruling of this court that deciding what games children will play is not the job of the California State Assembly, it's the job of the parent. And I put that in your handout because you need to know. There is no one else minding the score. Any kid can play any video game, purchase and play any video game regardless of content. There's no law against it. There can be no law against it because the United States Supreme Court has said there can be no law against it. There's no one else but you. You have to know what games your son is playing. So, no devices in the bedroom. Again, the handout is mynameLeonardSachs.com/thematha.pdf. What really matters? What should we be doing as parents? Well, until a decade or so ago, that was a matter of conjecture, philosophy, religious conviction, or lack thereof. But we now recognize it's an empirical question which is susceptible to empirical evidence. And the key research in this regard are these longitudinal cohort studies, which we now have quite a few, where a large number of kids were enrolled, often in infancy, sometimes at birth, and then followed for 12, 15, 20, 30, 32, 38 years with this enormous investment in manpower, where you go into the school at 12 years of age and interview this kid and the teachers and the classmates and the parents and do all these inventories of psychological parameters, and then follow this kid into adulthood and see at 32 years of age, at 38 years of age, how much money is this person making? Are they in good health? Are they addicted to drugs or alcohol? Have they been convicted of a felony? How do they describe their life satisfaction? Are they happy? What predicts good outcomes in adulthood? Whether we're talking about freedom from drug abuse, freedom from alcoholism, good income, not being convicted of a felony. What about IQ or grades or test scores? It turns out that small to medium variation in IQ or grades earned at school account for very little of the variance in these outcome parameters. Virtue and character is what counts. Self-control, as measured at 9, 12, 14 years of age, predicts all good outcomes with a high degree. Counts for a lot of the variance. How do you measure self-control? At 12 or 14 years of age, you ask this kid, you ask the other students and the teachers and the parents, does this boy know how to take turns? Can this boy listen to adults and to their peers? So this is one of the graphs in your handout. Low self-control, as measured at 12, 14, 17 years of age, predicts a high risk of drug use or alcoholism at 32 years of age. High self-control at 12, 14, 17 years of age predicts a low risk of drug use and alcoholism at 32 years of age. IQ does not. Friendliness does not. Agreeableness does not. Low self-control at 12, 14, 17 years of age predicts low income at 32, 38 years of age. Low self-control at 12, 14, 17 years of age predicts a high risk of financial struggles at 32, 38 years of age. High self-control at 12 years of age predicts a low risk of financial struggles at 32 or 38 years of age. High self-control predicts high income and high social status at 32 or 38 years of age. Credit score. Low self-control at 12, 14, 17 years of age predicts low credit score at 32 years of age. High self-control predicts high credit score. And it's a big effect. It's a difference between a credit score of 600 and a credit score of 720. Same is true of wealth. These graphs are all in your hand. What really matters? What should we be doing as parents? It's no longer a guess. It's no longer a matter for philosophical speculation. We now have good empirical research from longitudinal cohort studies conducted over the past 40 years. But what really matters is virtue and character. I'm not saying that grades and test scores don't matter. They do, of course. But in our job as parents, our first priority has to be to teach virtue and character. And the funny thing is, American parents used to do that. American parents used to say, you know what, I would rather have you earn a C, honestly, than to cheat and get an A. But American parents now are much more likely to say, hey, you want to get into Princeton? You're not just competing against kids from the United States anymore, you're competing against kids from Europe and Asia, so you've got to have great test scores. There has been an explosion in cheating among American kids in the last 20 years. Not only is it more common, it's changed. As recently as 20 years ago, the top students in the United States didn't cheat. It was the low-performing kids who cheated. But today, researchers find that the top students are as likely or more likely to cheat compared to the low-performing kids. Because the top students really want to get to the top of school, and that's what matters. Grades and test scores are what matter. Virtue, character, are not words that American kids take seriously in many schools. Dr. James Heckman won the Nobel Prize in Economics. He's at the University of Chicago. And he has been studying these longitudinal cohort studies. In particular, the study I mentioned that launched in 1970 with 17,000 kids and completed its most recent wave in 2008, analyzing those kids now 38 years of age. That's what Dr. Heckman looked like when the study launched, and that's what Dr. Heckman looks like today. And in your handout, you'll find a link to his essay analyzing these data. He says grades and test scores are poor predictors of success in life because they measure only one skill, cognitive achievement. Far too much credit is given to cognitive skills. Character skills play the key roles. And he says American education fails the test, looking at the nation as a whole. There are some exceptional schools. I would say that's me speaking, not him. But looking at the nation as a whole, he concludes American education fails the test. Because American education today is all about grades and test scores. It's not about teaching character. Which parameter, measured at 12 years of age, is the best predictor of good health and wealth and happiness at 32 years of age? It is self-control. These other things are good. Friendliness and agreeableness is positively associated with happiness at 32 years of age, but not positively associated with good health, and not positively associated with wealth. IQ is positively associated with wealth at 32 years of age, although less so than self-control, I might add. But IQ is not positively associated with good health, and not positively associated with happiness. Smarter people are not happier than low IQ people. That's an empirical finding. It's not a value judgment. So if you've been reading the psychology literature over the last 20 years, you know that one of the big advances in psychology is this recognition of the Big Five. Before roughly 1990, personality psychology was just a mass of confusion, with everyone had a different theory about how to understand human personality, type A or whatever. But over the last 2 decades, an empirical consensus has emerged from many different researchers that really has now reached the point of consensus. And again, I've got some links in your handout to this point if you're not familiar with this. That just about every human personality trait can be mapped in a 5-dimensional space, along with 5 dimensions. 5 dimensions being conscientiousness, openness to new ideas, friendliness and agreeableness, neuroticism, and extroversion or introversion. Now, some of those traits are very difficult to change. For example, extroversion, introversion seems pretty hardwired. And you can talk to extroverted parents who are very frustrated that their child is an introvert. And they think their child is defective because the parents love to socialize and go to parties and their kid doesn't want to. The introvert can play a role. They can put on a mask. They can pretend. They can say, hey, I'm Bill Clinton. How are you? You know, I feel your pain. But it's an act. It's not real. The person hasn't changed. Some of these personality characteristics are resistant to change. But it turns out that conscientiousness is one of the most valuable. Conscientiousness being that one of the Big Five that consists of self-control, honesty, integrity, those traits. And it turns out that is very amenable to parental intervention. In 8 weeks to it, you can change your child's self-control. American culture has become a culture which is taught to children and teenagers. I took this photo earlier this year in Times Square. Pepsi's slogan, live for now. And we could spend a whole day just talking about how American culture now undermines self-control, quite deliberately. Not because it's healthy, but because it's how you sell product. Live for now. Go for it. Whatever floats your boat. Those are uniquely American notions. You'll see them when you visit Switzerland and Australia, New Zealand, but when you're overseas, you realize, okay, this is American propaganda. This is not Swiss culture. This is not Australian culture. This is not Scottish culture. This is American. But in this country, this is where we are. We are fish swimming in this aquarium. A culture that actively undermines self-control and conscientiousness. A toxic culture. Very different from American culture 40 years ago. The most serious hazard of American culture today, by American culture, I mean the culture of Instagram, Justin Bieber, Lady Gaga, Miley Cyrus, mainstream pornography, and live for now. is that it actively undermines self-control. It rewards a loss of self-control. So your job is to teach self-control. It's part of the job of a parent. How do you do it? You say, no dessert. 20 years ago, a teenager could not accept a phone call from a friend at 2 in the morning because the phone would ring and the parents would know. Today, a teenager can accept a text message from a friend because the phone never rang. It buzzed. She has it on vibrate mode. And she's not talking, she's texting. So the parents don't even know this is happening. But the rules of good parenting have not changed. 20 years ago, parents understood it's more important for a kid to get a good night's sleep than to be up for an hour in the middle of the night texting her friends. That was true 20 years ago, it's still true today. The only thing that's changed is the technology. It's now easy for a girl to be up for an hour in the middle of the night texting, for a boy to be up for an hour in the middle of the night playing his video game without the parents knowing. But just because it's easy doesn't mean it should happen. And it's your job to make sure it doesn't happen. And it is uniquely your job. So 9 o'clock at night, you must. And 9 o'clock the latest. Some parents use 7 o'clock, some parents use 8 o'clock, but 9 o'clock is the very latest. You go around the house saying, all right, hand me your phone. You switch the phone off, and it goes in the charger. It stays in the parent's bedroom. Your teen can have it back the next morning. Now, when you get home, and you announce to your son or daughter that you're going to implement a new strategy. You heard this talk by this rather grumpy family doctor from Pennsylvania. And implement a new policy that you're taking their phones at 9 o'clock and they can't have them back the next morning. Your son or daughter may complain. They may say, but I use my phone as my alarm clock. Reassure them that they still make actual alarm clocks. You can go to the store and buy one, they're not expensive. And now they get really upset. They say, but what if there's an emergency? And my friend has to reach me. Remind them that you still have a landline and that your friend is welcome to call the house phone and you, the parent, will pick up. And you'll decide if this emergency warrants waking your teen up at 2 in the morning. It probably doesn't. It can probably wait. This is your job. It is not reasonable to expect an American teenager in 2014, what's your daughter supposed to say tomorrow morning at school? When her friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight, how come you didn't answer? It's not reasonable to expect her to say, well, recent research from Stanford suggests that sleep deprivation may impair cognitive performance. It's not reasonable to expect any American teen to say that. You have to allow her to say, hey, my evil parents take my phone every night and won't let I have back till the next morning. It is your job to be the evil parent. So earlier this year, New York Times had an article on this topic. Just having the phone on in the bedroom, just the knowledge that it might go off, disrupts your sleep. Is less restful, less deep. And the younger the person, the more profound this effect. It's a bigger effect for teenagers than it is for adults. No phones in the bedroom. American teenagers are getting significantly less sleep compared with American teenagers 20 years ago. That's not true in England. It's true in the United States. Is your child sleep deprived? As a physician, I ask parents, is your child sleep deprived? And they say, oh no, he's in his bed 9 o'clock at night and doesn't come out until 6 a.m. the next morning, 9 hours, he's fine. I say, well, what's he doing in his bedroom? Well, I don't know, doors closed, I don't want to violate his privacy. Does he have one of these in the bedroom? Question. But then you have no idea what he's doing. You have no idea what she's doing. Your son could be downloading pornography, your daughter could be uploading pornography, your daughter could be engaged in cyberbullying, your son could be a victim of cyberbullying. You have no idea. Are you sleep deprived? Again, the group at Stanford has found 2 simple questions. Who says that? Do you use an alarm clock? If you do, you're sleep deprived. If you have a healthy day-night cycle, meaning you go to bed at the same time every night, you get the amount of sleep that you need, you don't need an alarm clock. You wake up at the same time every morning. So I asked the parents, does your son sleep in late on a Saturday morning when he has no other obligations? Oh yeah, he sleeps till noon. We gotta kick him at noon or he'd sleep all day. Okay, he's sleep deprived. Kids who are not sleep deprived don't do that. Just in the past decade, there's been this emergence of a caffeine culture across middle-income America, where kids are stopping off at Starbucks on their way to school to get a double shot espresso latte because they really need it. And incidentally, there's no gender difference on the sleep deprivation. The daughter is staying up past midnight, photoshopping her pictures to upload to Instagram. The son is staying up past midnight, firing photon torpedoes at the enemy. The girls and boys are equally sleep deprived, and as a result, they're having trouble concentrating and focusing. And they tell the doctor, I'm having trouble concentrating and focusing. And the doctors look at Connor scales from teachers. Yeah, he's having trouble concentrating and focusing. Let's try Adderall, or Vyvanse, or Concerta, or Metadate, or Focalin, or Daytrana. Let's try it and see if it helps. Take Vyvanse, 30 milligrams, Monday morning. And a phone call from the teacher Monday afternoon. Wow, what a difference! I had no idea your son was so sharp. And the teacher, and the parent, and often the prescribing physician all believe, wow, this Vyvanse was prescribed for treating ADD. It was tremendously helpful, therefore he must have ADD, right? Psst, wrong. He doesn't have ADD, he's sleep deprived. What's Vyvanse? It's amphetamines, it's speed. It's much stronger than the double shot espresso latte at Starbucks. It compensates for the sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation perfectly mimics ADHD of the inattentive variety. There is no Connor scale, no Vanderbilt scale that can distinguish whether this kid is inattentive because they're sleep deprived or because they truly have ADD. Medications are non-specific. But the appropriate remedy, the kid who is not paying attention because he's sleep deprived, the appropriate remedy is for the parents to turn off the devices so the kid can get some sleep, not to prescribe Schedule II stimulants. You'll find a chapter on that in Boys and Girls. No devices in the bedroom. That's the official guideline of the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's your job. No friend can tell your son that he's not allowed any devices in the bedroom, but a parent can and a parent must, because there's no one else to do that job. So I want to conclude with a word about choice of school. Choice of school empirically is the single most important influence on a teenager outside of the home. Choice of school governs, to a large degree, for American kids, the peer group, who they're going to be hanging with. So let's say it's about 8 years ago that Rich McPherson asked me to come speak to prospective parents. He and some of his colleagues from the Heights were starting a new boys Catholic school in Upper Montgomery County. And he asked me to speak to parents about the benefits of an all-boys format for boys. And after my talk, a husband and wife came down to talk with me, and the wife said, Dr. Sachs, this is a really good talk. And the husband said, yeah, better than we expected. And they said, we're going to go home and share this information with our son and consult with him and see what his thoughts might be about perhaps attending this. Turned out their son was 8 years old. I said, don't go home and consult with him. Just tell him he's going to a boys' school. Doesn't matter if the boy is 8 years old or 14 years old. When you ask a kid, hey, you want to try this other school? Try going to this different school than the one you've been going to? Most human beings at any age prefer the known over the unknown. When you ask a 14-year-old child, you want to stay in the school where you're at, or go to the same school your friends are going to, or do you want to go to a different school in a different part of the county with kids you've never met? Most kids will say, I'll stay with the kids I know. If your son says, yeah, sure, I'll leave all the kids I know, leave the school I know, and go to another school in a different part of the county I don't know anybody at, then I'd be really concerned that things at the school where he's at must be really awful. You have to make this call. When a child is choosing a school, they're choosing a school based primarily on where they think they'll have fun, and where they think they'll be popular. Whether they're 8 years old or 14 years old, that's perfectly age appropriate. They're not an adult. We didn't have a chance this evening to go into the brain research. The brain research, the largest studies conducted by the National Institutes of Health, and the girls reach full maturity in terms of brain development by about 22 years of age. Boys, not until 30 years of age. So that explains a lot, if you think about it. The 14-year-old boy is not an adult. He's not even halfway there. What is he supposed to say when his friends say, hey, why are you leaving us to go to a boys' school? What's he supposed to say? Well, I thought there'd be fewer distractions in my studies of American history. It's not plausible for an American boy to say such a thing. You have to allow him to say, hey, I didn't want to, my evil parents made me go. The choice of school must be made by the parent, overruling the son. Don't ask for his consent. It's not reasonable, any more than it's reasonable to ask for the child's consent about, is it okay with you if I take your phone away every night at night? No, it's not the choice for the child to make. It's not within the child's competence. Find a school which understand that in this culture, in the toxic American culture of 2014, the school's mission must go beyond teaching math, science, English, history. The school says, look how great a school we are because of our great SAT scores. Run to the nearest exit. That's not the school you want. IQ and test scores do not predict life satisfaction or health at 32 or 38 years of age. We need a school where the leaders have a vision for helping a boy to become a gentleman, or a girl to become a woman of valor, Proverbs 31. And that's the school you choose, even if you have to overrule your child's vigorous assembly. Again, the handout is online, leonardsachs.com/thematha.pdf. We talked about boys this evening. Girls are having problems too. Girls are not the winners here. The rate of anxiety, depression, and non-suicidal self-injury have increased by 4, 5, 10-fold in the last 25 years. We find that documented and explored in my book, Girls on the Edge. My next book comes out next year from Basic Books, The Collapse of American Parenting, Why Most Kids Would Now Be Better Off Raised Outside the United States. What you need to know, the 3 things you must do if you're staying here. And the title is not a joke. The title is not a joke. In terms of mental health, physical health, and life satisfaction, kids raised outside the United States now do much better than kids raised in this country. That wasn't true 30 years ago, it is true today. This country used to be a great place to raise kids, it no longer is. That's book number 4. So there's my contact information, and as Dr. McMahon said, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be back here tomorrow morning to meet with the teachers, so I'll be happy to address your questions. If you want to step to a microphone or raise your hand. Comments, questions, disagreements, yes?
I just have a comment to share with everyone when
Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto came out, I think it was junior year. My son's a senior, so it was in September. I refused to buy the game, mostly because it's misogynistic. I didn't like the way there were no women in it.
Use the microphone.
Talking about Grand Theft Auto, which there are 5 installments.
I just want to share this story. So I refused to buy Grand Theft Auto for my son, and I emailed a couple of my friends, his friends' moms, and said, don't buy it. Because it's so misogynistic, that was my biggest issue with it. All the other games shoot, everything else. So he got really, really mad, and it was really, really hard, but it only took 3 weeks before it all died down. Because all the other kids beat the game, and it was over with. I was pretty amazed. So it was 3 weeks of whining, his being mad at me, and saying I don't have anything to talk about at lunch with my friends, blah, 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 blah. And it was all done. I was pretty amazed. And it only took 3 weeks, and it was all over with, and everyone stopped talking about it. Something to think about.
Other comments, other questions? Yes.
Has there been, so
My
clear the research about the personality shift and the changes in sort of the negative direction. Is there any research, has there been anything in any of these longitudinal studies where there's been a reversal? So, you know, a child playing, you know, from 12 to 15, and then there's a stop to that, or, you know, there's a point at which you can reverse this personality shift. Is there anything that speaks to that?
Well, Anderson and Gentile certainly have found that if the boy stops playing video games, the personality shift can change if you disrupt the peer group. That happens most often when parents move. And sometimes I have to counsel parents to move. Because they'll say, well, he can't, these are his friends, they all play video games. Then I said, then you have to move. And, you know, my wife and I moved from Maryland to Pennsylvania. In substantial part because we didn't think that Western Oklahoma Montgomery County was the right place for our daughter. So I'm not telling parents to do anything I haven't done. We have to be willing to move if that's what's necessary. But if you disrupt the peer group and stop the games, then things can change. But I don't think that's your question. I think your question is, if the kid continues to play the game, does this affect stop or reverse? And the answer is no, it does not. Another part of your question, if I understood it correctly, is I've talked about the negative effects of video games. Are there positive effects of video games? Yes, there are. A boy who spends 20 hours a week playing these first-person shooter games will develop eye-hand coordination that is faster than a boy who doesn't play these video games. So a very simple eye-hand coordination test. When you see the light, press a button. The boy who spends 20 hours a week playing video games will be about 20 milliseconds faster, about 2/100ths of a second faster than the boy who never plays video games. And a game like Halo, that's the difference between life and death. But it turns out he is atrophying other skills, like can he use facial expression as a clue to meaning. We expect adults to be able to tell by looking at someone, is this person angry, sad, tired, or bored? But the boy who spends 20 hours a week playing video games is much less able to do that. So I don't see an upside. We can talk about that at length. There have been studies that have been a lot of this eye-hand coordination thing. A famous and very often cited study of surgical residents found that surgical residents who had thousands of hours of experience playing video games were able to master laparoscopic technique faster than surgical residents who never played video games. And that one paper has been cited thousands of times by advocates of video games saying, look, this helps doctors be better doctors. Well, not really. As a practicing physician, I can tell you that being a good doctor in primary care means being a good listener. Mastering laparoscopic technique is a very particular manual skill where you've got a left-right reversal, and you've got to know that moving your hand this way in real life and moving the thing that way on the screen. And there are many video games that employ, especially the helicopter games, that employ just that kind of left-right reversal. So it's a trivial effect. It's not a meaningful effect. And it's a effect that the surgical resident can overcome with a few hours of training. So we could have a long debate about the benefits of video games. My short answer is there are none. Turn off the screen and get your son out in the real world. Yes.
You talked about loss of control and addictive behaviors. What about dependence? And the reason why I bring that up, I have a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old, both raised in the same home, video games since Pac-Man. One could care less about video games, a 21-year-old. The 17-year-old doesn't have the addictive behaviors, but what I noticed is that dependence on the video game where they set aside a certain time where they would like, it's in their mind that this is my time to play my video game. And it just seems like there's a quiet dependence on that time that's secretly dedicated to that video game playtime. So the dependence is what I'm
It's a very good question. And it's a question, again, that has many analogs in medical practice. One of the ways to distinguish is this dependence or is this really addiction, which is the next notch up, is what happens when you interrupt. What happens when you say, okay, no video games today. If it's just dependence, the person will say, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll do something else. If it's addiction, the person shows withdrawal and they freak out. So that's the question. If you say no video games today or tomorrow, if the person says, all right, well, it's too bad, but I'll find something else to do. That's not addiction. If the person freaks out and shows withdrawal, that is addiction. Does that answer the question? Well, I encourage parents of teenagers to limit pretty severely the kids' use of video games. I gave you the Anderson and Gentili guidelines, which I think are pretty generous. Let me give you an example from Dr. Meg Meeker. I'm a big fan of hers. She wrote a wonderful book, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. And she and I were both on the Today Show earlier this year, which was kind of silly, but the great thing about it was spending an hour with her in the green room, which was really fascinating. So Dr. Meeker has 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. And she's a pediatrician in full-time practice. And she said to her son, okay, you're not playing any video games, period. I don't care what the other boys are doing, you're not doing it. And he was just so upset all throughout middle school and high school. He's like, I'm the only one. Everyone else is playing this video game. I'm the weirdo. You're totally ruining my whole life. And she's like, fine, too bad. And then he turned 18, and he said, look, I've got a job, I've got my own money that I've earned, I'm going to go out and buy an Xbox, and I'm going to play Call of Duty. He's like, okay, fine. So he goes out and starts playing these games, and then he goes off to college, University of Wisconsin-Madison. And then just a week or so ago, before Dr. Meeker and I met in New York, she said her son called and told her, hey, I just earned $400, guess how? And she said, I have no idea. He said, I sold my Xbox and all my video games. He said, at university you find some of these guys who expect you to be impressed because they're like really good at playing Call of Duty, and I'm like, so? But they don't know how to talk. They don't know how to listen. They don't even know how to pick up girls. They're clueless. All they know how to do is how to play their game. I figured, I don't want to do that. The human brain is plastic. It becomes less plastic as we get older. There's a huge difference between a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 18-year-old. I think Dr. Meeker did the right thing. By not allowing her son to play those games when he was 12, 14, 17, he developed other skills. He became a guitar player. He became someone who knows how to talk to girls because he wasn't spending all those hours playing video games. Remember Dr. Anderson's point about displacement. Every hour that the kid spends playing video games is an hour he could have been doing something else, something in the real world. So my vote is to turn off the devices. If there's any doubt, any concern, turn off the devices. Get your kid into the real world. Yes?
I have a question. My son is going through this phase now where I guess he's a freshman here in math, but before coming to math, we used to talk a lot. Now he's in this phase now where he doesn't really talk at all. Kind of, how does school go today? Okay, kind of one-word answers. He gets to these phases, we have long talks like last night, but it doesn't happen as much as it used to. How can I kind of draw that out and help him be more?
That's actually part of tomorrow's presentation for the teachers, but here's a tip. Face-to-face doesn't work real well for most teenage boys. Shoulder-to-shoulder works better. Shoulder-to-shoulder with a moving environment works best. So the best place to have a conversation with your son is not at home across the dinner table. It is in the car, with you driving and him in the passenger seat. or go for a walk, not face to face, but shoulder to shoulder. And a real good strategy is a long car trip. Okay, 20 minutes is not enough. The New River Gorge, West Virginia, is a good choice for people living here. It's about 5 hours drive. And that's about right. It's a beautiful, beautiful stretch of West Virginia. It's cheap, there's great skiing, great hiking, there's a lot of things to do. Actually, that was in an earlier version of this presentation that had more about talking to your son. Because I have this link to little cabins that you can rent. With no Wi-Fi, incidentally. You want to call up the lodge and say, hey, do you folks have good mobile coverage? You do? Okay, sorry, we're going somewhere else. And this is why West Virginia is so great. Because there's lots of places in West Virginia with terrible mobile coverage, and that's what you're looking for. So a 5-hour car trip is about right. The first hour, he may not talk to you at all. But after the first hour, he'll usually start to talk if he has something to say, because there's nothing else to do. Again, the rule in the car is no devices. Not allowed to look at a screen, no earbuds. Again, the more affluent the household, the more screwed up they are. Because in the affluent household, the kid's got a device, he's got earbuds, they've got a DVD player in the second seat, and the parents can go for a 5-hour drive and never talk to their kid. Turn off the devices, go for a long car drive, 5 hours to southern West Virginia, and that's a pretty good trick. If you won't talk, then make it a win to see me. Or actually, there's a great doctor in McLean, Virginia, I can give you her name, who's very skilled in assessing boys and see if there's some other more fundamental problem here. Does he have a psychiatric disorder? But very often, it's just that he's disengaged. Other comment?
Good evening, Doc. Question. I went to typical private all-boy private high school, played sports. I want to address the issue of lack of sleep. I thought that was part of life as a young man, private school, playing sports. Of course, I go to bed at 8 o'clock now. I'm older, but you know, my kids both kids go to private school. They go to bed 10, 11 o'clock at night because they play sports and they study. So, how to get around, get the proper amount of sleep, because they got to get up 5:30, eat breakfast, get to school by 7:30. So I thought it was just part of life as a private school kid playing sports.
It has changed over the last 20 years, and again, it seems to be more of a problem in more affluent neighborhoods. And this is a big, weird switch. If you went to university and you graduated before 2000, you were probably taught that low income is a risk factor for psychiatric disorder, because that was true in the United States, right up through the 1990s. But in the last 20 years, it has changed. And being affluent is now a major risk factor. Kids from affluent homes are now more likely to be anxious and depressed than kids from low income homes. Kids from English-speaking homes are now more likely to be anxious and depressed compared to kids from homes where they speak Spanish or Chinese or Korean, which is a huge change compared to 30 years ago. 50 years ago, there was a Harvard University Press monograph saying, look, when a kid comes to this country from Europe or Asia, we want to teach them English as soon as possible because we know, we've got good evidence, that rapid assimilation into Anglophone American culture decreases the risk of anxiety and depression. And that was true 50 years ago. It is absolutely not true today. And when parents migrate to this country from East Asia, South Asia, or Europe, and they speak a language other than English at home, the recommendation is that they should not speak English at home. They should insulate their child from American culture, because the sooner that kid learns English, the greater their risk of becoming anxious or depressed. American kids are getting less sleep than they were 20 years ago. Affluent American kids are getting much less sleep than kids 20 years ago. Affluent kids at boarding schools are getting way less sleep. And a lot of this has happened very recently. I've been doing talks for schools for 12 years, and I've met with students for the past 12 years, and I've always asked students one question, and that question is, what's your favorite thing to do in your free time when you're by yourself and no one watching? And 10 years ago, you'd get an amazing variety. Kids would say, I like to run, I like to listen to music, I like to play guitar, I like to play the piano, I like to draw, I like to paint, I like to sing, I read the Bible. But now, in the last 3-4 years, when I visit leading independent schools, one answer has emerged that you didn't hear much 10 years ago. It is the overwhelming answer now, and that is sleep. And take a nap. Increasingly, for affluent American kids, their favorite free time activity is sleeping because they're so sleep deprived. They're so overscheduled. There's a wonderful book out just a few months ago called Excellent Sheep, about the process of applying to elite universities in the United States. It's no longer sufficient to be good at 2, 3, 4 extracurriculars. If you want to go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, you've got to be good at 9, 10, 11 extracurriculars. So in the past decade, there has been this ramping up where affluent kids from elite families feel they have to do more and more, stay up later and later at night, and they're all exhausted. And it is draining, and it is toxic. And at some point, the parent has to say, you're doing too much. And the parents are baffled sometimes. They'll say, this is not coming from me. I am not pushing him. He's pushing himself. He's going berserk. And again, sometimes it's the parent who has to exercise the authority to say, you're being governed by the wrong idols. It's not about getting into Princeton. It's about being a good human being. And the one seems to be crowding out the other. And increasingly, there's a tension in this country where kids feel that they have to do it all. This is more of a problem with girls than it is with boys, but you find some boys who do fall victim to this. And they feel they have to stay up past midnight because they have to be perfect in everything. And again, this is a uniquely American and toxic fetish. In no other country do parents try to impress other parents by talking about how overscheduled their kids are. Only here. So if your son or daughter is sleep deprived, it's your job to encourage them to cut back on the activities and get more sleep.
I agree with your no device in the bedroom policy. My question is as to the self-control element that you were just talking about. If we're policing the no devices in the bedroom, when does the self-control of them placing their own devices come in? I have kids 17 and younger. I'm hoping it kicks in before college, but I just don't see that happening.
Yes, indeed. And that's a very, very common question. Thank you for asking it. So let me restate the question in the way that I hear it very often, which is parents will say, look, if I'm enforcing these rules at home, no devices in the bedroom, no visiting pornographic websites, etc. Look, in a couple of years, he's going away to university. And I'm not going to be there then to enforce those rules. So I don't think this makes any sense to me. I'm worried he's going to rebound. And he's just going to go berserk when he gets to university because he hasn't learned to control himself without me doing it for him. So in the book of Proverbs, we read, raise up a child in the way he should go. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. Okay, what does the research have to say about that? Well, the research would say that the book of Proverbs is unduly optimistic. We could restate that line from the book of Proverbs in light of contemporary research this way. Raise up a child in the way he should go. And when he goes away to college, you have improved the odds. There are no guarantees. But again, going back to Dr. Meg Meeker, who would not let her son play video games until he turned 18. You develop different habits, and virtue is more a matter of habit than anything else. You develop different ways of spending your free time. If this boy has developed a rich life out of school, has developed hobbies, musical instrument, at 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years of age, because you didn't allow him to play video games, because you didn't allow him to have screens in the bedroom. When he goes away to university, you have improved the odds. There are no guarantees, but you've improved the odds. Conversely, if you say, no, I'm going to do like most American parents do, my son can do anything in the bedroom he wants to with his devices, it's none of my business. Many American boys are now spending 1, 2, 3 hours a day masturbating over pornography. This has become common. Nancy Jo Sales has a great article on this in Vanity Fair. This is one of the areas where the popular magazines, if they do good reporting, in-depth interviews, can give us an insight that the scholarly literature cannot, because the scholarly literature in the United States is paralyzed by fear of being judgmental. It would be difficult even to get a paper published on the effects of looking at pornography because you're implying that there's something wrong about that, and that's judgmental. So you have to look at the popular literature to realize that, look, I have met with 15-year-olds in this country, 15-year-old boys on many occasions and many schools. And I'll say to the 15-year-old boys, okay, how many of you boys have at least 1,000 porn photos on one of your devices? 110 boys in the auditorium. Almost every hand goes up. I say, okay, how many of you boys have no pornography at all on any of your devices? 2 hands go up. I say, okay, would either of you care to share with your peers why you don't have pornography on your devices? And one boy raises his hand and he says, well, I'm an evangelical Christian. Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, and I don't think he'd want me to do that. I say, okay, and how about you? And the other boy says, well, I'm a Mormon and we're not supposed to do that. Okay, that's fine. Those 2 boys have an excuse. But if you're not an evangelical Christian or a Mormon, you don't have an excuse. I don't believe those other hundreds of boys. I don't believe that all of them have thousands of porn photos on the device. But that's American culture today. That's what it means to be an American boy in 2014. That's what normal boys do. And it changes you. If that is your experience, and most of your ejaculatory experience comes from masturbating over pornography, it changes who you are at 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age. And if a boy has a phone in the bedroom, that's very likely some of the stuff he's looking at. And the brain is very plastic. And addiction to pornography is a very real phenomenon. Again, from my own practice, and this was when I was in Montgomery County, Maryland. Mom is very upset with her son. And she says, you know, you roll out of bed late every morning, you work a few hours a week at the coffee shop, you're 27 years old. You don't have a life, you don't even have a girlfriend, for goodness sake. And the son laughed and said, well, I used to have a girlfriend, then she realized I only worked a few hours a week at Starbucks, she dumped me. Mom was like, well, duh! How many young women want to be with a man who's got no ambition beyond earning pocket money for his pornography and his video games? Mom's pulling her hair out. He's not. She insisted he come see me. He was okay with that. And he said lots of unkind and ungentlemanly things about this young woman who had dumped him. He said she was fat. She wanted me to take her places, do stuff. He said, $19.95 a month. I said, wait, what do you mean? What's $19.95 a month? And he mentioned a porn site, a pornographic website. And he said, yeah, the girls are way prettier. I said, wait, those aren't girls, those are pictures. They're pixels on a computer screen. Wouldn't you rather be intimate with an actual woman rather than masturbating over pornography? He said, no. That's become the norm in American culture in a very short period of time. Now, pornography existed in our culture 30 years ago, or so I've been told by reliable sources. But 30 years ago, boys didn't boast about their pornography. On the contrary, boys boasted about actual sexual exploits. Pornography was something boys didn't boast about. That was second choice. That was if you couldn't get any action. But today you will find many boys, it has become the norm in American culture. I've got actually a presentation on that point, without any pictures. Train up a child in the way they should go. And when they go away to college, you've improved the odds. Virtue is about inculcating good habits. And it's your job to inculcate those good habits at 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age. This is the Western tradition. This is the Judeo-Christian tradition. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, You read Vishinantam Levanecha. That's usually translated, teach them diligently to your child. It's not what it says. Shanan in Hebrew means to inscribe. It's the same word for chiseling on a stone. That is the Judeo-Christian tradition. You don't just offer your kids a smorgasbord of different moralities and let them choose. You teach them diligently to your child. You inscribe them on your child. You inculcate good habits. And then when they go out to university, you've improved the odds. If, by contrast, you have let your child govern how much time they have with a mobile device or with a laptop and what they do in their bedroom with the door closed with that device. And if that boy is like most American boys, he's spending an hour, 2 or 3 every day masturbating over pornography. What's the odds that when he gets to university, he'll say, oh, well now I'm at university and I see all the other boys doing the same thing. I, however, will turn over a new leaf and I will abstain from such wasting of time and I will respect them as human beings. Not very likely. So that's my long answer to a short question. But I do want to answer it one more way. Sorry, but it's such an important question. The question is, if I require my child to behave virtuously, aren't I increasing the risk of rebound down the road? You know, and people will say, you know, I saw a movie about that, or I saw something on Oprah about that. Okay, but what is the scholarly research? The scholarly research from the longitudinal cohort studies finds that the child who is behaving virtuously at 14 is much more likely to be behaving virtuously at 21, 28, 32 years of age. Imagine the same notion in the workplace. Imagine that you're recruiting a new employee, and you can choose between Sonia and Vanessa. And Sonia has a history of always showing up for work on time, working hard, never stealing from the company. And Vanessa has a history of showing up for work 2 hours late, not working very hard, and often stealing from the company. What's the likelihood you're going to say, okay, well, Vanessa's gotten all of her madness out of her, and now she'll probably turn over a new leaf. Or Sonia's been bottled up all these years, she's probably going to just become a terrible person when she starts working for us. People become who they are. And if you inculcate good habits and virtue at 14 years of age, much better likelihood your child will be behaving virtuously at 21 years of age. As Will Durant said, commenting on Aristotle's ethics, he said, virtue is a matter of habit. And I think that's the key. We need to inculcate that habit in children. Yes, next question. Oh, I'm sorry, over there. Over there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think I qualified as one of the older folks that you were describing earlier, and I was thinking about when I was a kid, and I don't want to come off as sounding, you know, like, when I was a kid, we were better off than the kids now, but I think that's what you said 30 years ago. Kids were better off than they are now. And I think about, okay, well, what are we doing? And I think we invest a lot of time outdoors. We're outdoors a lot, and we're also outdoors a lot without adult supervision, which meant we had to govern ourselves, we had to create games ourselves, we slid down hills on boxes, we made forts. I mean, so there's a lot of creativity, there's also a lot of communication. I don't see kids play outside. Now, I'm lucky my son likes to get outside and throw the football around, or pitch a baseball around, whatever. But it's getting increasingly more difficult to get him outdoors. And I'm just curious, I know for me that feeds, feeds me mentally. When I get outdoors, I feel better. I'm wondering, is there any concrete evidence or research that shows that it's healthy for kids to be outdoors and, rather than being indoors and being away from the screen? Is there a direct opposite effect there?
Absolutely, and I think there is a lot of good research. I summarized some of it in my book, but you'll find a whole book of it in Richard Liu's wonderful book, Last Child in the Woods. The subtitle refers to nature deficit disorder. He asserts that a lot of the problems we see is because kids are not spending enough time outdoors. In a different presentation that I have for teachers, I talk about called kindergarten. In German-speaking Europe, there are many Kindergärten, meaning they enroll kids 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age, and there's no building. They meet every day in a park. There's a lean-to in the event of thunder and lightning, but otherwise everything is outdoors. And Americans are puzzled when they hear about this. They say, what happens when it snows? And I've got a whole bunch of pictures of these kids playing in the snow, building igloos, building forts, throwing snowballs at one another. Kids love snow. We don't because we have to drive in it, but children love it. And what the Germans will say is, es gibt kein schlechtes Wetter, meaning there's no such thing as bad weather, just unsuitable clothes. The kids will play outdoors in all weather down to 20 degrees below, 20 degrees Celsius below. So Richard Lewis' book, Last Child in the Woods, is a compendium of research showing that kids need time outdoors. When I was practicing in Montgomery County, Maryland, my mother told me how she said to her teenage son, it's a beautiful day, why don't you go outside? And he said, where would I plug in my Xbox? And he wasn't joking. Again, when I was growing up, the boys especially were outdoors all the time, but now you push this boy outdoors, he's likely going to be alone because all the boys are inside on their video games. But Richard Lewis' book, spelled L-O-U-V, Last Child in the Woods, great summary of research showing that kids need to be outdoors and they need to connect outdoors. Over here.
Hi, Dr. Sachs. I just want to say I enjoyed the presentation. My question is geared towards the factors, and I understand the factors. Some of them are internal factors within the home, and then there are the external factors, as you have in your book, the environmental estrogens. But what do you do, and I want you to speak specifically to, especially those boys of a darker hue, minority boys, where the external factors are factors beyond their control. Just walking down the street as a Latino boy, walking down the street as an African American boy, and those external factors, authority figures, police officers in their community that are butting against them, and they're doing all of the right things, and all the right things are being instilled in them in their homes.
Okay. If you remember the data that I presented at the beginning, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, you can cross-tabulate that by race, by sex, male or female, by household income. There are 3 major disadvantages growing up in the United States. One is being poor rather than affluent. One is being something other than white rather than white. And one is being a boy rather than a girl. Those are, it turns out, statistically independent. You can add up the numbers at the NAEP website. Being a boy rather than a girl is associated with a disadvantage on the NAEP test score of about 15 points. Being non-white rather than white is associated with a disadvantage of between 15 and 20 points. Being poor rather than affluent is associated with a disadvantage of about 15 points. They add up. The triple whammy is being a low-income African-American male. You got all 3 factors going against you, and the low-income African-American male does 45 to 50 points worse than the affluent white girl. 50 points is the equivalent of 5 grade levels. It's a huge, huge difference. And, you know, I respect Barack Obama, but I think that his recent initiative talking about boys of color kind of misses the point. Because, yeah, boys of color from low-income neighborhoods do face an incredible challenge. They've got a triple whammy. But the great danger of talking about them is that white people in Potomac think they're off the hook. They're not. In fact, the gender gap in Potomac is slightly bigger than it is in Anacostia. And I've spoken on this topic in both locations. Montgomery County has a program called GTLD. gifted and talented but learning disabled, which is a fancy name for boys. The GTL programs I have seen are 100% boys. See, in Potomac, everyone is either gifted or learning disabled or both. There's no such thing as a below average child in Potomac. So you got these boys who are not doing well in school. And so Montgomery County has created a special program, gifted and talented but learning disabled. They're not learning disabled, they're boys in a school district that has no idea how to teach boys and is struggling to find out. This evening presentation is not about race. I'm not saying race is not important. Race is hugely important. Right now, in Staten Island and Ferguson, Missouri, I think it's obvious to every American that we got big problems in this country with race. This talk is not about household income. Household income is really important. Low-income kids are disadvantaged in this country. Boys of color are disadvantaged in this country. But my area of expertise is gender, male and female. And that's what this talk is about. I'm not really qualified to speak to the question of what do we do about race in the United States. We've got a huge problem there. But it is separate from the issue of gender. It is separate from the issue of gender. It is statistically separate. There is no interaction effect, to use a statistical term. There is no multiplicative effect. It's a simple addition. If you're a boy instead of a girl, you lose 15 points. If you're low income instead of affluent, you lose 15 points. If you're black instead of white, you lose 15 to 20 points. Those are three separate factors. So I'm not talking about it, not because it's not important, but because I'm not qualified. So that's all I have, sorry.
I have a question about my 15-year-old daughter who struggles with depression. I can tell her no more iPod after 9 o'clock, and that's the end. She will be very unhappy. She won't fire me, but she'll be hurt. Okay? I can put my foot down and say no more iPod in your bedroom at all. I've been hesitating to give her a phone because she doesn't want a phone to make phone calls. She wants a phone only if it can do text messaging. If it doesn't do text messaging, she's not interested. And so I've been very slow and thinking sooner or later I'm going to give her the phone that does the text messaging.
How old is she?
15. And so I'm wondering, like, that it seems it's much easier for me to sort of have a negative influence on the negative behaviors. I'm lucky she's got friends, and I like a lot of her friends. Her best friends are the ones I like the least. They're really the best ones.
Okay, so I hope you'll take a look at my book, Girls on the Edge, where I address that. Let me just answer very quickly. Girls want to be women, boys want to be men. But we no longer provide any guidance. So they turn to the internet and to social media and to Instagram and to their own same-age friends, and they get a lot of bad answers. It's not sufficient to turn off the device. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You must also connect your daughter to a community of women, a community of actual women. And again, one of the curious things is that you find that Spanish-speaking Catholics are much healthier than Anglophone Catholics, Catholics who speak English at home, in terms of the risk of anxiety and depression among girls. And I learned why when I was in West Palm Beach, and went to the shopping mall, which is beautiful. And you see these girls speaking English, all these 15-year-old girls speaking English with a dozen other 15-year-old girls speaking English. But when you look at the Latino girls, they are with a community of women. They're going shopping with women who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and there's a whole bunch of them. And it wasn't clear that these were even the girls' mothers. In the Latina community, girls hang out with women. In the English-speaking community, girls hang out with girls their own age. So the challenge is you've got to connect your daughter to a community of women. A girls' school, the right kind of girls' school, certainly can do that. I know Stone Ridge does that because I've visited on several occasions. The church can do that sometimes with a little prodding. They can easily create opportunities for girls to spend time with and go on outings with women. The church group, the church youth group in most dioceses in the United States has lost its way. In most dioceses in the United States, the church youth group is 9th grade girls and 9th grade boys having a pizza party. That's not what they need. Girls need to be connected to a community of women. Boys need to be connected to a community of men. And curiously, the Catholic Church used to understand that, but it's lost its grip. Nationally, you'll still find individual parishes where they get it, but you don't find that nationally. So you have to push, you have to speak to other parents in the community and find a way for your daughter to connect with women and turn off the devices as you're doing. Yes.
Just wanted to explore a little bit more the discussion about the GTLD. It's intriguing. One thing I think we do know is that boys, especially at a younger age, are over-identified for learning disabilities because they act out against the very kind of classroom structures that you described in the first chapter, and I suppose we'll be talking about tomorrow. But just to understand a little bit more, we do think that there are such a thing as learning disabilities, and GTLD in Montgomery County does have girls, not just boys. But if you would just describe the ideal classroom in which young boys up to high school could really accomplish what you also described in the first chapter as experience in education, how does that classroom look? You've talked about it in early childhood in Europe, but how does that high school classroom look, where perhaps a geometry class would be structured through architecture and building habitat home, understanding angles and everything like that. If you could just draw that picture for us, and then also address whether there is such a thing as a learning disability, or whether in fact we've created a teaching disability.
Well, I suppose I deserve that. Of course, there's such a thing as learning disability. And I work with kids who have learning disability. But in the United States, we overdiagnose. And I think part of that is that middle-income and affluent parents are very uncomfortable with the notion of below average. So again, when I was in Montgomery County, Maryland, I did a very thorough assessment over 3 sessions of a boy who was getting average grades at school, B's. His parents lived in a big mansion in Potomac. And one's an investment banker and the other's a surgeon. And their son is getting average grades. And they wanted to know, did he have a learning disability? And I screened for learning disabilities, which are real and important. But this particular boy didn't have any. I said, the reason your boy is earning average marks is because on these various parameters, he is showing average ability. And in some cases, slightly below average. But you know, in any group of 100 kids, 49 will be below average. It's not a pathology, and it's not an incident. These parents have a combined household income of $2 million, or in excess of $2 million. If you suggest to an affluent parent that their child is average, they will be offended. And the receptionist told me that mom was whispering, actually muttering rather loudly, below average, how dare he? We never saw him again. They will find another doctor who will say, all Justin needs is 20 milligrams of Adderall. And then you'll see how brilliant he is, and his grades will go up. We now know that Adderall, Ritalin, conservative medicated focal interferon events work the same in every child. They boost achievement in most children. They boost achievement in normal kids more than they boost achievement in ADD kids. In fact, that's only become clear in the past decade, and that contradicts a lot of the drug company propaganda that was out there previously. A child in the United States is 15 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADD than a child in England. A child in the United States is 40 times more likely to be diagnosed with pediatric bipolar disorder compared to a child in Western Europe. A child in the United States is 50 times more likely to be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder than a child in Western Europe. In other words, if you take 50 kids diagnosed with autism in this country and take them to Western Europe, 49 out of 50 will be told you don't have autism. You overdiagnose in this country. And an overdiagnosis is a pretext for prescribing medication. That's a different presentation, which I'm happy to give, but not tonight.